كانوا قليلا من الليل ما يهجعون.
And this is something that Allah has told us again and again in the Quran, that Allah and His Messenger have told us that we are always going to be faced with different kinds of weather. As you can see right now, it's raining right now. And no one, no matter who they are, no matter how much money they have, no matter how much power they have, can stop the rain, right? If we go to Trump right now and ask him, yo Trump, you know, you're the president of the United States, so could you kindly make it stop raining here in Indiana? There's absolutely nothing he can do, right? And that's because this is not something that anyone has any power over. But as you see, is anyone in this room getting wet? Is anyone right now getting wet? No. Why aren't we getting wet? I just said we can't stop the rain, right? But we're not getting wet either. Why? And that's because we're inside of a shelter. And so the reality is that we don't control certain things about life. That's just a fact. But what we can control is where we are when that weather hits. What we can control is, so if it's cold outside, I can't make it warm, right? We don't control the sun. But what I can do is put on a coat. I can put on gloves. I can put on a hat. And so what I've done is I've found a way to cope. I've found a way to survive the weather, even though I can't control the weather. Does that make sense? I've found a way to stay dry, even when it's raining outside. That is what faith gives us. Faith gives us a way to stay inside a shelter, to stay dry, even when it's wet outside. And even when there are storms. So what kind of storms do we have here? We have tornadoes, right? Now, even if there was a tornado, even if I had severe weather outside, there is a way to protect myself. I can go into a basement. And so the reality is that even when we have storms hit us in life, if we learn certain skills, if we learn how to be inside of the proper shelter, we won't get destroyed. And so weather will come, weather will go, hardships will come, hardships will go, fitan, tests will come and tests will go, but we will survive. Does that make sense? And to survive a storm requires certain things that you have to do. To survive the weather that comes in your life, there are certain skills. And the reality is that if we are in the habit of staying within shelter, then we will be able to survive our storms. The question becomes, how do I stay within shelter? And moreover, how do I build a shelter? Okay, I like to use this example because we all know the story, and we all, I think it's very illustrative. How many of you remember the story of the three little pigs? Okay, so like 3 of you. That's fine, I'll remind you. So the story of the 3 little pigs goes like this, yeah? There are 3 little pigs. One is really lazy, and one is sort of lazy, and one is not lazy. He works hard, okay? So the lazy one builds a very weak shelter. The lazy one builds a shelter out of something like straw or something. And so this house is not very strong. Then you have the next pig, and this pig is not quite as lazy, so he builds his house out of twigs or something like that, okay? And then you have the third pig. The third pig is working hard. So the third pig builds a strong shelter, puts in the time to make that shelter out of brick, all right? So now what happens is you have the big bad wolf come, yeah? And now the big bad wolf, does everyone know what he does? He huffs and he puffs. You know there's teachers in the room when you know exactly what the big bad wolf does, right? So he huffs and he puffs and he blows the first house down. And the reason why is because it was very weak. And then the next house, he huffs and he puffs and he blows that one down because it was also weak. But what happens with the third shelter, the one made of brick? The third shelter, he huffs and he puffs, but he can't blow it down. Why? Because it was solid, it was strong. Now here in life, we have all types of big bad wolves, okay? we have some that look like Trump. We have some that look like financial problems. We have some that look like different kinds of trials. So what we have in life is we have different things that come and huff and puff at us and try to do what? Blow our house down. Blow our house down. To break us down. To make us, to basically destroy us or to make us weak. And the reality is we can't stop the wind. We can't. We can't actually stop a wolf from doing what wolves do. What do wolves do? They huff and they puff. But what we can do is build a strong shelter. You understand what I'm saying? So now the question I get to, or the point that I'm getting to, is how do we build a strong shelter in life? How do we can't be, delusional and think that the sun is always going to be out in life, right? We can't be delusional and say, well, in my life, it'll just never rain. Because if we are that way, it's like, I read this quote recently and it said that if a person only travels when the sun is out, they won't ever end up at their destination. And the truth is that we have to keep going in life even when it's not perfect, when life is not perfect, when things are difficult. So the question becomes, how do we build that strong shelter made of brick? Yeah, and be able to handle the weather of life. Fair enough? So this is the reason why I chose this topic. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just give you guys 4 pieces of advice. All right? And within those 4 pieces of advice, there's going to be sub-advice. Cool? So to begin with, I want to tell you this, and that is, there is something within our power that has a very profound effect on our life, on our psychological state, and on our spiritual state, and on our emotional state. And that is something called focus. Focus. And this is something I emphasize a lot, and I will emphasize again. What you focus on grows. So whatever you focus on in your life is going to actually start to grow. And when it grows, it starts to become bigger, and it also starts to surround you. Okay? So let me give you an example. There are some people, and their habit is that they focus on problems. Okay? And sometimes it's not for any bad intent, but it's because that's just the way they're designed. They are problem focused. And sometimes, ironically, it's because they're problem solvers. Do you guys understand what I mean? So some people are very problem solve. Their orientation is problem solving. Now, a problem solving orientation sometimes tends to then look for the problem in any situation so as to what? Solve it. These are the people who then you might later on say, oh, they're so critical. But the reality is they're looking for the problem so they can solve it. Do you guys understand what I mean? Now, what happens with this, and this is a subtle issue, yeah, is that when you focus on problems in a situation, see, there's no situation that's ever going to be perfect, is there? Are you ever going to have a perfect situation in this life? No, it goes against the definition of dunya. Dunya, by definition, is imperfect. Everyone with me? So there's always going to be a problem. There's never going to be a perfect situation. So, but if you focus on the problem in every situation, here's what happens to it. It starts to look bigger than it is. And it will actually start to consume you. Everything that you talk about will be the problem. Everything that you think about will be that problem. Everything that maybe you post about will be about that problem. Everything you read about will be about that problem. Do you understand? And this actually becomes a pitfall that sometimes happens even to Islamic workers. So for example, an activist. An activist, mashallah, is working for a cause. And that's amazing work. But an activist has to also be careful because, for example, I'll give you an example. An activist who is fighting against Islamophobia, all right? So their work is extremely important, right? But if an activist who's fighting against Islamophobia only is reading about Islamophobia, only is talking about Islamophobia, only is posting about Islamophobia, only is discussing, you understand what happens? Do you know what happens to that person? It will start to affect them. And the reason it'll start to affect them is because everywhere they're looking, everywhere they're thinking, everywhere, it's actually the focal point is a problem. Because Islamophobia is a problem, right? And racism these are problems. But what happens is if that becomes the focal point, the only focal point in that person's life, it will actually start to affect their emotional, spiritual,